The Montana winter of 1987 hit harder than anyone expected. By mid-November, the temperatures in the small town of Whitefish had already dropped to -15 degrees, and old Samuel Brennan knew his forge would be tested like never before. Samuel was 73 years old, with hands scarred by decades of metalwork and a back that complained every morning. His blacksmith shop sat at the edge of town, a weathered building that looked ready to collapse but had stood firm for 42 years. Inside, surrounded by tools that once belonged to his father and grandfather, Samuel kept alive a dying trade in a world that had moved on to mass production and cheap imports. The heart of his operation was a Bellows system he had built himself in 1965. While other blacksmiths had upgraded to electric blowers and modern equipment, Samuel remained faithful to his crude wooden and leather contraption. It was massive, made from oak planks he had cut himself, with leather chambers he had stitched by hand using techniques passed down through generations. The mechanism creaked and groaned with each pump, producing a rhythmic wheeze that echoed through the shop like the breathing of some ancient beast. Everyone in Whitefish knew about Samuel's bellows. At the monthly meetings of the Rocky Mountain Blacksmith Guild, younger smiths would shake their heads when they visited his shop. Marcus Webb, a 35-year-old blacksmith who ran the modern metalwork facility across town, never missed an opportunity to mock the old man's methods. That Saturday morning, Marcus showed up at Samuel's shop with 3 of his apprentices. They had come to pick up some custom hinges Samuel had made for a restoration project. The moment they walked in, Marcus pointed at the bellows with a smirk. "You still using that dinosaur, old man? My electric blower can push 3 times the air in half the time. That thing belongs in a museum, not a working shop." Samuel continued hammering a piece of iron on his anvil, the orange glow of the metal reflecting in his weathered face. He did not look up. "Museums preserve what matters, Marcus. Maybe that is where it belongs. Maybe that is where I belong too." The younger smiths laughed. Marcus walked around the bellows, examining it with exaggerated curiosity. "Look at this, boys. Wooden planks held together with iron straps. Leather that is probably older than some of you. I bet this thing barely keeps a forge hot enough for basic work. How do you manage any serious heat with this relic?" Samuel set down his hammer and finally met Marcus's eyes. "It gets hot enough," Marcus scoffed. His own shop had state-of-the-art equipment purchased from industrial suppliers in Seattle. Electric blowers with variable speed controls. Temperature-regulated forges with digital readouts. Everything efficient, everything modern, everything expensive. "The guild is meeting next month at my facility. Maybe you should bring your antique and we can put it in the corner as a cautionary tale about refusing to adapt." The apprentices snickered. Samuel said nothing, returning to his work. Marcus collected his hinges and left, his laughter echoing even after the door closed. But Samuel did not mind the mockery. He had heard it for years. What bothered him was the growing certainty that his way of working was disappearing. 3 blacksmith shops had closed in Montana that year alone. The craft was dying, replaced by factories and machines. Young people were not interested in learning the old methods. They wanted quick results, modern efficiency, profitable businesses. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Samuel sat in his small apartment above the shop. The walls were lined with photographs of his grandfather's forge in Pennsylvania, his father working iron in this very building, himself as a young man learning the trade. For generations of Brennan blacksmiths, and the line would end with him. His daughter Rachel had moved to Portland years ago, working in technology. His son Michael had become an accountant in Boise. Neither had any interest in metalwork. Samuel did not blame them. There was no money in blacksmithing anymore, not the traditional kind. Only people like Marcus succeeded, and they did it by abandoning the old ways entirely. He walked back down to the shop and stood before his bellows. In the dim light, it looked even more crude and primitive. The wood was darkened by decades of smoke and heat. The leather showed cracks and repairs. The whole contraption seemed held together by willpower and stubbornness. Samuel ran his hand along one of the oak planks. His grandfather had taught him that good bellows were not about appearance. They were about understanding airflow, pressure, and the relationship between oxygen and fire. Every dimension of these chambers, every angle of these valves, every thickness of this leather had been calculated through centuries of accumulated knowledge. But who cared about that anymore? In a world of electric switches and instant results, ancient wisdom looked like ignorance. The old man locked up the shop and climbed the stairs to bed, unaware that in 3 days, a brutal cold front would sweep through Montana, and everything Marcus Webb believed about modern superiority was about to be challenged. The cold front arrived on Tuesday with a ferocity that shocked even long-time Montana residents. Temperatures plunged to -38 degrees, with wind chills reaching -50. The entire region went into emergency mode. Schools closed. Roads became impassable. The local news warned people to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. By Wednesday morning, Marcus Webb faced a crisis. He had a contract deadline for a major project in Billings. A hotel renovation required 200 custom iron railings, and the client had already delayed payment twice. If Marcus missed this deadline, he would lose not just the contract but his reputation with the construction company that had referred the work. He arrived at his shop before dawn, cranking up the heating system and firing up his forge. The electric blower hummed to life, pushing air into the fire chamber with its usual efficiency. Marcus loaded coal into the forge and watched the temperature gauge climb. But something was wrong. The gauge stalled at 900 degrees. He needed at least 2,000 degrees for the ironwork ahead. Marcus increased the blower speed. The motor whined louder, but the temperature barely budged. He checked the electrical panel. Everything seemed fine. He examined the blower unit itself, an expensive German-made machine he had purchased just 18 months ago for $8,000. The motor ran, the fan spun, but the airflow felt weak. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus called the equipment supplier in Seattle. They promised to send a technician, but with the weather, nobody could reach Whitefish for at least 4 days. He called 2 other blacksmiths in neighboring towns. Both reported the same problem. The extreme cold was affecting all their electric blowers. Something about the motor lubricants thickening, the electronics failing in the brutal temperatures. By noon, Marcus stood in his modern shop, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of useless equipment. His forge sat cold. His deadline approached. His pride began to crack like ice under pressure. One of his apprentices, a young man named Tyler, spoke quietly. "What about old Samuel? His equipment does not need electricity." Marcus shook his head immediately. "That old fool and his wooden contraption? There is no way that primitive thing can handle the heat we need for this volume of work." But as the afternoon wore on and the temperature outside dropped even further, desperation began to overtake pride. Marcus stared at the iron stock waiting to be forged. Each hour of delay cost him money and credibility. Finally, as the winter sun began its early descent, Marcus grabbed his coat. "I cannot believe I am doing this." He walked out into the bitter cold, heading toward the edge of town where Samuel Brennan's ancient shop still stood, smoke rising from its chimney like a signal from another era. Samuel was working when Marcus arrived. The old blacksmith stood at his anvil, hammer in hand, shaping a glowing piece of iron with steady, practiced strikes. The forge blazed with intense heat, and the crude bellows pumped rhythmically in the corner, its wheeze and creak filling the shop with that ancient sound. Marcus stood in the doorway, his pride fighting against his desperation. Samuel glanced up but said nothing. He continued his work, the orange sparks flying with each hammer blow. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "Your forge is running." Samuel nodded, still hammering. "It is." The younger blacksmith stepped inside, feeling the welcome heat after the brutal cold outside. He looked at the bellows, watching the wooden arms pump up and down, the leather chambers expanding and contracting. "My electric blower died. The cold killed it. Every modern shop in the region is shut down." Samuel set down his hammer and placed the iron back into the coals. He worked the bellows manually, and Marcus watched as the fire intensified, the flames dancing higher, the heat radiating outward. "That thing is keeping your forge hot enough?" "Hot enough for anything I need. Been working all day." Temperature has not dropped once. Marcus walked closer to the bellows, examining it with new eyes. What he had mocked as crude and primitive now revealed itself as something else entirely. The thick leather chambers were designed to maintain flexibility even in extreme cold. The wooden frame, though weathered, showed no signs of warping or weakness. The iron straps and hinges, all hand-forged, held everything together with unshakable strength. How is this possible? Every piece of modern equipment in town is failing, but this old thing keeps working? Samuel allowed himself a small smile. My grandfather built Bellows through the Depression. They had to work in any condition because people had no money for repairs or replacements. He taught my father, and my father taught me. This is not about being old-fashioned. This is about understanding what actually works when everything else fails. Marcus stood silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised both of them. I need help. I have 200 railings due by Monday. My shop is useless. If I do not finish this contract, I lose everything. Samuel studied the younger man's face. He saw the humiliation there, the pride crumbling, the desperation breaking through. And what would you have me do? Let me work here. Use your forge, your bellows. I will pay you whatever rate you want. If you are rooting for Samuel right now, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. This story is just getting started, and you will not want to miss what happens next. Samuel walked to his bellows and ran his hand along the oak frame. You called this a dinosaur. Said it belonged in a museum. Marcus looked at the floor. I was wrong. I am asking for your help. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. The only sound in the shop, the crackling of the forge and the steady rhythm of the bellows. Finally, he spoke. Be here at 5 tomorrow morning. Bring your iron stock and your tools. We work my way at my pace. No shortcuts, no complaints. Marcus nodded, relief flooding his face. Thank you. I will pay you half the contract value. Samuel waved his hand dismissively. We will figure that out later. Right now, go home before you freeze on the walk back. The next morning, Marcus arrived in the dark with Tyler and his other 2 apprentices. They unloaded iron stock from his truck and set up their workspace in Samuel's shop. The old blacksmith was already there, his forge blazing hot, the bellows working steadily. What followed was the most intense work week of Marcus's life. Samuel showed them how to work with the bellows, teaching them the rhythm and timing that maximized airflow. He demonstrated techniques for maintaining consistent heat without electronic temperature gauges. Everything was done by eye, by feel, by decades of accumulated knowledge. The younger men struggled at first. They were accustomed to digital controls and instant adjustments. Working with Samuel's methods required patience, attention, and physical effort. But as the days progressed, something remarkable happened. They began to understand the deeper principles behind the work. Samuel explained how the bellows chambers were sized to create optimal pressure. He showed them why the leather needed to be thick in certain areas and thinner in others. He demonstrated how the angle of the airflow affected the heat distribution in the forge. Every aspect of his crude system was actually precisely calculated, refined through generations of trial and error. By Friday, they had completed 150 railings. The work was faster than Marcus expected because the forge maintained such consistent heat. No waiting for electric blowers to reach speed. No fluctuations in temperature. Just steady, reliable fire fed by a bellows system that had outlasted every modern innovation. On Saturday evening, with all 200 railings completed, Marcus stood exhausted but amazed. The order was finished ahead of schedule, and the quality was exceptional. His apprentices had learned more in 5 days than in months at his modern shop. Samuel was cleaning his tools when Marcus approached him. I owe you more than money. I owe you an apology. Everything I said about your methods, about this bellows, about you being stuck in the past. I was the fool, not you. Samuel set down the file he was holding. You were not a fool, Marcus. You just did not understand yet. Modern tools are not bad, but they made you forget the principles underneath. When the tools fail, the principles remain. Marcus looked at the bellows with something close to reverence. Teach me how to build one of these. Samuel studied Marcus for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in the younger man's request. Finally, he nodded slowly. Building Bellows is not something you learn in a weekend. It takes months, maybe years to truly master. But if you are serious, I will teach you. Over the following weeks, even as the extreme cold relented and Marcus's electric equipment came back online, he found himself returning to Samuel's shop every evening. The old blacksmith began sharing knowledge that had never been written down, only passed from master to apprentice across generations. They started with understanding wood selection. Samuel explained how oak provided strength and flexibility, why the grain direction mattered, how to identify pieces that would withstand decades of heat and stress. Marcus took notes obsessively, photographing every detail, asking questions that Samuel answered with patience he had not shown in years. The leather work proved even more complex. Samuel taught Marcus about hide selection, thickness variations, stitching patterns that allowed expansion without tearing, treatments that kept the material supple in extreme temperatures. Each lesson revealed layers of sophistication hidden beneath what had appeared crude and simple. Word spread through the blacksmith community. The story of how Samuel's primitive bellows had saved Marcus's business during the cold front became legend. Other smiths began visiting Whitefish, wanting to see the system that had outlasted modern technology. The Rocky Mountain Blacksmith Guild meeting in January was held at Marcus's facility as planned, but Marcus made an unexpected announcement. We are also meeting at Samuel Brennan's shop. I want everyone to see what real craftsmanship looks like. What I dismissed as outdated is actually advanced engineering that most of us have forgotten. 30 blacksmiths crowded into Samuel's workshop that afternoon. The old man demonstrated his bellows, explained its construction, and answered questions for 3 hours. Younger smiths took measurements and sketches. Older ones nodded in recognition, remembering similar systems from their own early training. Marcus stood beside Samuel throughout the presentation, no longer the cocky modern smith but a humbled student proud to learn from a master. After everyone left, Samuel sat on his work stool, exhausted but energized in a way he had not felt in years. Marcus lingered behind. The guild wants to commission you to build bellows systems for our educational programs. They want to preserve this knowledge. Make sure it does not die with your generation. Samuel felt something shift in his chest. For years, he had believed his knowledge would vanish when he did. His children had not wanted it. The world had moved on. But now, unexpectedly, people were asking him to teach again. How many systems do they want? 5 to start. 1 for each regional teaching shop. They will pay you $15,000 per system, plus materials. Samuel did a quick calculation in his head. That was more money than he typically made in 2 years. And they want you to train 3 apprentices full-time. People who will learn everything and carry it forward. 3 years later, Samuel Brennan's shop looked different but felt the same. The building had been reinforced and expanded, with a new section dedicated specifically to teaching traditional bellows construction. The original bellows still stood in the corner, still working, still breathing life into the forge as it had for decades. Samuel was 76 now, moving a bit slower but with eyes that sparkled with renewed purpose. His 3 full-time apprentices had completed their training. 2 had already built their own bellows systems and opened traditional smithing schools in Oregon and Wyoming. The third, a young woman named Jessica from Colorado, had stayed on to help Samuel fulfill the growing demand for his work. The 5 commissioned bellows for the guild's educational programs had led to 12 more orders. Museums wanted them for demonstrations. Historical sites needed them for authentic workshops. Even some modern blacksmiths, having learned from the cold front crisis, wanted backup systems that would never fail when electricity did. Marcus Webb had become Samuel's closest friend and most devoted student. His modern shop still used electric equipment for efficiency, but he had built his own traditional bellows system as backup. More importantly, he had changed his entire teaching philosophy. His apprentices now learned the fundamental principles before touching any modern equipment. On a warm June afternoon, the guild held a ceremony at Samuel's shop. They presented him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing not just his decades of work, but his role in preserving essential knowledge that the craft had nearly lost. Samuel's daughter Rachel flew in from Portland with his 2 grandchildren. Watching her father receive recognition, seeing the respect in every blacksmith's eyes, she felt a pang of regret for not understanding sooner what her father had been protecting all these years. After the ceremony, as people mingled and examined the bellows, Rachel approached her father. "Dad, I never really understood what you were doing here. I thought you were just stubborn, refusing to modernize. But this is not about being old-fashioned, is it?" Samuel shook his head. "It is about remembering that before we had easy solutions, we had to truly understand problems. Modern tools are wonderful, but they should enhance knowledge, not replace it." When Marcus's equipment failed, he had nowhere to turn because he had forgotten the principles. That is what I have been trying to preserve. That evening, after everyone left, Samuel stood alone in his shop. The bellows sat silent now, resting after another day of work. He ran his hand along the oak frame one more time, thinking of his grandfather, his father, and now the new generation he had trained. The craft would continue. The knowledge would survive. And somewhere down the line, when the next crisis came and modern solutions failed, someone would remember that the old ways were not primitive but proven, not crude but carefully refined through centuries of human ingenuity. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this story. If it touched your heart, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories like this one, and let me know in the comments what kind of story you would like to hear next. See you in the next video.